And with that, we are live. Well, first off, thank you everybody for coming to day 2 of the Austrian Economics Discord Conference. Yesterday was an amazing day. We got to hear from Jeff Dice, Stefan Kinsella, as well as Jonathan Newman and Per Bieland as well. Fantastic day. Day 2 here, we're kicking off on YouTube here with Walter Block. We'll be moving back onto Discord later and hearing from Peter Klein and from Patrick Newman later on tonight as well. Now, just a quick introduction for those of you who might not be super familiar with Walter Block. For those of you who have been in the Liberty space for a little while, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He is the Harold E. Worth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair of Economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. He is an adjunct scholar of the Mises Institute and Hoover Institute, as well as the writer of Defending the Undefendable, book I personally recommend. It's absolutely fantastic. Walter Block, you have the floor.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks for inviting me to this august gathering. I'm delighted to be a part of it. I think my title was The Importance of Austrian Economics, and I think that the reason Austrian economics is important is that it's the only correct economics. All the other economics is not correct. Only Austrian economics is correct. Now, there is a Venn diagram. Let me put up a Venn diagram here. Come on, whiteboard. Where's the whiteboard? Here's the whiteboard. Here we have a Venn diagram, and this is Austrian economics, and this is other economics, Austrian, and here is other economics. And there is an overlap. We agree on this stuff, but and maybe I shouldn't make it like that. Maybe I should make it more of an overlap. There is more of an overlap between Austrian and other economics. And there's a big overlap. I mean, we agree with the neoclassicals on a lot of things, but not on everything. And where we disagree, we Austrians are correct and them guys are wrong. So I think that is one of the great reasons why Austrian economics is important, because it's correct in the areas where we disagree. So where do we disagree? Well, we disagree on many, many areas, but to me, the most important area where we disagree is a matter of praxeology. So what's praxeology? Praxeology is a bunch of statements that are necessarily true and yet tell us about the real world. So let me make a 2x2 matrix here to illustrate what I'm talking about. And here we put analytic statements. And here we put synthetic statements. When my handwriting isn't as good as it could be. And this is the empirical status of statements. And over here we put a priori. And over here we put a posteriori. So this is sort of a null set. There is no such thing as an analytic a priori. What is this is how we get there, how we learn knowledge about these things. So what we have over here is synthetic a posteriori. These are empirical statements. And what we have over here is tautologies. And what we have over here is synthetic a priori. Synthetic, I don't know why my pen isn't cooperating. Synthetic a priori statements. Okay, so what's an example of each? An example of tautology would be all bachelors are unmarried men, or elephants or big fat gray creatures. And this doesn't tell us about the real world. It just tells us about how we use language. And I think all economists agree that there are such a thing as tautologies. And then there are empirical statements. What's an empirical statement? Oh, it's raining outside. How do you determine the truth of it? You have to look and see. It's falsifiable, it's testable, and an economic empirical statement would be, oh, the elasticity of bananas is 10%, which means that if you raise the price of bananas by $100, you'll have a reduction in banana purchases by 1%. And that would be an empirical claim, which again, you have to test and you have to see. And I think all economists agree that there are tautologies and there are empirical statements. Where we get in trouble, where we Austrians take a certain view, and the mainstream economists do not, is on the synthetic a priori. Now, it's not true that every Austrian agrees with the synthetic a priori. Because Hayek did not. So I'm more channeling Mises and Rothbard and Hoppe and other people that I regard as excellent Austrian economists who believe there are such things as synthetic a priori. What's a synthetic a priori? A synthetic a priori is a statement that is necessarily apodictically true, can't be falsified, can't be tested. The whole thing is necessarily true. Let me give you a synthetic a priori out of economics. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, or triangles have 180 degrees. What you do is you don't test that. You don't go looking around for triangles and see if they have 180 degrees or not. If they don't, one of the lines wasn't straight in the triangle. Or another one from non-economics would be nothing can be colored all green and all red at the same time. So those would be synthetic a priori statements, not in economics. Now let me give you a few in economics. One would be, you bought that shirt, that lovely purple shirt. How much did you pay for that?
The shirt that I have on here is about $20 or so, I think.
Okay, you paid $20 for that shirt. I deduce or claim that at the time you bought that shirt, you valued that shirt more than 20 bucks, and therefore you made a profit off that purchase ex ante. Let's say you valued it at 25. Well, then you made a $5 profit. The guy who sold you that shirt probably had 3 million of them and probably valued them maybe negative because he's trying to get rid of them. But let's suppose he valued it at $1 and he sold it to you for 20. He made a $19 profit. Now, the Marxists would say you exploited each other. We Austrians would say human cooperation, you each benefited ex ante. Now, ex post, you might have changed your mind. It's usually the case you buy a shirt, you're not going to regret it. But ex ante, necessarily, you benefited from purchasing that shirt. That would be a synthetic a priori statement that is not testable. How could we falsify that? How could that not be true? It's necessarily true. And because we Austrians believe in such claims, the mainstream thinks that we're a bunch of cultists, religious fanatics or something, because they are, logical positivists, and they believe that there are only two kinds of statements in the world, tautologies and empirical statements. There is not this third category of synthetic a priori, but yet there are dozens of them. For example, there's a tendency for profits to equalize in all industries. Well, if industry A is making 100% profit and industry B is making 2% profit, people are going to leave industry B, which would raise the profits there, and suppliers will enter industry A, which will push down profits, and there'll be a tendency for them to be equal. At any given time, they're not equal, but that doesn't falsify a tendency claim. So all tendency claims are synthetic a priori, and they tell us about the real world. They give us information. They're not just tautologies, nor are they empirical statements. There are whole bunches of others, and a lot of these I get from Hans Hoppe, who's done brilliant work on this. For example, whenever voluntary trade occurs, both parties intend to improve their economic welfare. Or human action, a man acts. Well, if you deny that, that's an action. So you can't get away from people acting. Or minimum wage. Whenever we have a minimum wage, other things equal, there'll be more unemployment than otherwise would have been. I don't say there'll be more unemployment. There might not be more unemployment because other things might not be the same. But there'll be more unemployment than would otherwise have occurred and we never know what otherwise would have occurred. But still, we know that minimum wage is not like a floor under wages, raising the floor and you raise wages. Rather, it's more like a hurdle over which you have to jump. And the higher it is, the harder it is to jump over. So minimum wage necessarily creates more unemployment than would otherwise be the case. And, Card and Kruger did this study of minimum wage, and what was it? They found that I think New Jersey raised its minimum wage and it didn't have more unemployment. From that, they surmised that the minimum wage doesn't create more unemployment. Nonsense. They just should have waited a little bit, or just because they couldn't find it doesn't mean, look, just because you can't find a triangle with 180 degrees doesn't mean triangles don't have 180 degrees. So I think there are many other synthetic a priori statements, and there are really dozens of them. Free trade and minimum wage and rent control and all sorts of government interventions like that are necessarily problematic from an Austrian point of view. And so you might say, well, what's the purpose of econometrics? Are Austrians against econometrics? Econometrics are an attempt to hold everything else constant to see if A causes B. Well, we Austrians are not against econometrics. It's rather we interpreted it very differently. The way they interpret it is to test whether minimum wage law creates more unemployment than otherwise would have been the case, or whether people really intend to gain when they engage in commercial activity. The way we Austrians, and by the way, when I say we Austrians, I'm just speaking for myself. Austrians disagree, and maybe not every other Austrian economist would agree with everything I say. So this is just my own view. My own view here is that the purpose of econometrics is to illustrate what's going on. Let me tell you about my PhD dissertation. I did it with Gary Becker, who was a famous Nobel Prize winning economist. And my thesis was that rent control creates lousy housing, lousy rental housing. The more rent control you have, the worse the housing is, other things constant. So I had an econometric equation set, and my main independent variable was presence or absence, or how many years did a city have rent control, my observations with cities. And I try to hold everything else constant under the sun that I could think of. Oh, I don't know, wealth and weather and crime rates and whatever, because they might affect housing other than rent control. And most of the time I got good results on my independent variable. It was the right sign and it was statistically significant. Everything was fine. But every once in a rare while, and I did many iterations, I would get the wrong sign. Namely, the more rent control, the better housing was. And every once in a while, horrors, it was statistically significant. Now, what Gary Becker should have said, if he was a good, actually what he did say, and my thesis is if you scratch a good economist, even a mainstream one, you're going to find an Austrian. What he did say is, he didn't say block, you moron, but he said block, go out and do it again until you get it right. So what was testing what? Was my stupid econometric equations testing this apodictic necessary relationship between rent control and lousy housing? No, it was just trying to illustrate it. And sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I didn't. So I try to convert him into Austrianism by saying, well, what's testing what here? Is my empirical work testing what we know to be true? Or is it more correctly, what we know to be true is testing my empirical work, and we know what the right answer is. So the whole thing is sort of silly to think of it as a test. I never could convert him to the one true faith. Okay, that is, I think, the most important aspect of Austrian economics, but now I want to do a few others. And one of the others, and I'm going to need my screen again, and I hope my handwriting improves. Let's see if my handwriting improves. Okay, so here we have we have money over here, and over here we have utils. So this is 10 utils, this is 20 utils. This is 30 utils. And here we have diminishing marginal utility of money, diminishing marginal utility of money. And what we do is we're going to take money from rich guy, and the rich guy now has 100,000, and we're going to take 1,000 away from him, so he'll only have 99,000. And here is a poor guy, and this poor guy only has 6,000 a year, and we're going to give him that 1,000, and he'll have 7,000. And guess what? The mainstream people are going to say, well, look at this addition of utility. We now have more utility because the rich guy only lost 20 utils, and the poor guy gained, I don't know, let's make this 35 utils here. I'm not sure. Well, the rich guy lost 15 utils. I don't know why I can't write anymore. He lost 15 utils, and this guy gained 35 utils. So we have an extra 20 utils. And this justifies redistribution of money from rich to poor. This is something that most mainstream economists would say, yeah, that's right. We Austrians would say, get a life. This is crazy. First of all, there ain't no such thing as utils. And there's no such thing as utils. And I mean, we do believe in ordinal utility. I like, I don't know, pistachio ice cream better than cherry ice cream. That's okay, no problem with ordinal utility. But this is cardinal utility where you count utils, but we don't have any units of happiness. The whole thing is just ludicrous. It's just made up. It's just silly. So one of the problems is that we have utils here. And I'm not sure why I can't draw anymore. Very frustrating. Well, what the heck? Doing my best here. Okay, so one problem is there ain't no such thing as cardinal utility. There's only ordinal utility. Now, the mainstream believe in ordinal also, but they believe in cardinal as well. And we only go along with them insofar as ordinal utility is concerned, not cardinal utility. The second problem is interpersonal comparisons of utility. It's one thing to say, that money is decreasing. That the more money you have, the less ordinal utility you have. But it's another thing to say to count this in terms of utils. So that's another difficulty. And I wish I could draw one more line. I can't draw another line. I'm not sure why. What's going on here? Let me clear all drawings, stop sharing. Maybe I can start again. Maybe I'll have better luck. No, I'm not having very good luck on this stupid thing. Heck, let me try again. Here's a whiteboard. Hey, now I can draw. Good. Okay, so here is the utils. And here is money, and here is the rich guy, and here is the poor guy. And, so what we could do is criticize this on the most basic element, but we could even criticize it on assuming that their diagram is reasonable, because maybe this is the diminishing marginal utility of the poor guy, and this over here is the diminishing marginal utility of the rich guy, so that when we take away his $1,000, we're taking away a lot of utils, and we're only giving the poor guy that many utils. So the whole thing blows up, as long as you don't say that they're both on the same curve, and I don't see why we'd have to say that they are on the same curve. Okay, one other diagram that I want to draw for you, because I see that I'm only got another 5 minutes or so before the questions Q&A starts. So let me do just one more. And this is the, well, actually, I'll do two more. One of them is, oh no, I can't draw anymore. Heck, I guess every time I have to draw, I have to get a new screen. One of them is indifference. They love indifference curves. They just love indifference curves. And here's an indifference curve, and here is a budget line, and here's apples, and here's bananas, and they say we're going to get on this point because that's the point where you reach the highest indifference curve given your budget line. Well, the problem with that is, indifference is a perfectly good English word. We know when we're indifferent. Like when getting back to you, when you bought that shirt, there were, I don't know, a dozen shirts exactly your size, just like that, the same color. And before you looked at it, you didn't care which of those shirts you got, but then you picked one. And when you picked one, you could no longer exemplify indifference anymore, because now you can only exemplify preference. So the reason that we Austrians are against indifference is because there's no way to reveal or demonstrate indifference. You can only demonstrate preference. Now, I know that I'm going to have to stop sharing because I can't draw if I don't. So let me try the last diagram that I want to put on the board. And that is the monopoly one. So here's the monopoly one. Let's see if I can, yay, I can draw. Okay, so here is average cost. And here is quantity, and here is price. And here is a marginal cost, which hits the average cost in the bottom point of the average cost. And here is a demand curve. Come on, demand curve. Yay, demand curve. And here is a marginal revenue curve. Marginal revenue. And here is where the perfect competitor would locate. And where do you get the monopoly quantity? Well, monopoly produces where marginal cost hits marginal revenue, which is right there. That's the quantity of the monopolist. And then you go up to the demand curve to get the monopoly point. And notice that the quantity of the perfect competitor is greater than the quantity of the monopolist. This is the quantity of the monopolist. And notice that the price of the monopolist is over here, and that the price of the competitor is below. And here's the price of the competitor. So we have a four-stage indictment of monopoly on the part of the mainstream economists. The first one is that the price of the monopolist is higher than the price of the competitor, and that's bad because high prices are bad. And they never say why high prices are bad. You know, the Maserati costs more than the Ford. Does that mean it's something bad? And the second one is that the quantity of the perfect competitor is greater than the quantity of the monopolist. Why is more quantity better than less quantity? There's no reason for that. The third part of the indictment is that the profit of the competitor equals zero in equilibrium, and we're always in equilibrium with a perfect competition, whereas the profit of the monopolist is greater than zero, and it's this box over here. That's the profit of the monopolist, and somehow earning a profit is no good. And then the fourth one is this thing called deadweight loss, and here's the deadweight loss. Whoops, I can no longer write. The deadweight loss is this triangle here. I don't know why I can't write anymore, but I can't write anymore. So that's the fourth indictment. And this is just an exercise in interpersonal comparisons of utility. What they're saying is that the area under the demand curve between M and C is how much value we place on this product, whereas the cost is only the area under the marginal cost curve, and therefore this dead weight loss triangle is a total loss. And what the government has got to do is step in and have antitrust. Now, Milton Friedman, God bless him, says, well, not so fast because antitrust costs something. So it depends upon how big this triangle is compared to how much the cost is of antitrust. Cost in terms of courts and judges and lawyers and stuff. You think full employment for economists trying to figure out this stuff. So we Austrians don't for a moment believe in this or give credence to this distinction between monopoly and perfect competition. It all depends upon the size of the industry. I mean, if you define the industry very, very narrowly, then you'll get high concentration. And for them, high concentration is monopoly. And if you define the industry very broadly, like all food, well, then you're not going to get monopoly. So the plaintiff wants to define it narrowly, so you get monopoly. And the defense wants to define it broadly, so you don't get monopoly. But the whole thing is sort of intellectually dead from the neck up. Okay, what I've done, to reiterate, since I'm just about out of time now, I was asked, why is Austrian economics important? And it's important because it's true, and we want truth in economics. And then I gave, 4 or 5 things where we disagree with the mainstream economists, where we have the truth and they don't. And with that, I'll rest my case, and now we can do some Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Block. So we have a few questions here for you. The first one here comes from the Slayer of Utility Functions, and they ask, what are we to make of certain statements that Mises makes where he seems to indicate that praxeology contains tautologies? For instance, he says in Human Action, page 38, that the quantity theory of money is tautological, but he seems to indicate that the action axiom is not tautological. Could it maybe be the case that the action axiom is a synthetic statement, but the rest of praxeology is analytic?
Well, I this is a tough question because, I don't have human action in front of me, and in order to do give a full answer, I'd have to see the thing, see the context in which it's written. I was just in a debate with David Friedman on these issues, and David and Bob Murphy and a few others got into it as to what Mises really meant, and did he contradict himself, because in Human Action he said one thing and somewhere else he said something else. My interpretation of Mises is that he believed in synthetic a priori statements. And I think certainly the fact that man acts is an indication of that, and the quantity theory of money would be another one. So my interpretation would be that Mises and Rothbard and Hoppe and all other good economists would say there are some, at least one synthetic a priori statement, which is enough to distinguish us from the mainstream. As to how many of them, and whether we should argue over this one or that one, whether it is just empirical or not, I think that would, I really can't answer that without seeing the stuff in print. So I'm doing the best I can with that question. That's the best I can do.
All right. Next question here comes from Dabchick. And he asks, given the unique role of money in economic calculation as the denominator of prices, can we say that money is indeed a special or unique good?
Now here's an area where I disagree with Murray. And by the way, I do disagree with Murray on some issues. I don't agree with him on everything. And let me just say one more thing about that. We Austrians disagree with each other. I disagree with Hans on things, with Mises, with Murray, and Murray disagrees with Mises on monopoly and things like that. Namely, we're not a cult. A lot of people accuse us of being a cult, like in the Ayn Rand cult. You disagree with Ayn Rand and you're out. Well, we disagree with each other, and we're still friends, and we're still colleagues, and we're still co-authors. Okay, I don't believe money is a unique thing. I don't think it's sui generis. I think there's either consumer goods or producer goods. Bill Barnett and I have a paper out on this. And what we say is that money, if you look at the Hayekian triangle from vertical, what money does is it brings us closer to consumption. Or if you look at the way Roger Garrison looks at the triangle, it's sort of east and west. Time is on the horizontal axis. Money brings us closer to consumption. From, let's say somebody is drilling for oil. Well, now the oil goes to a refinery. Namely, the refinery buys the raw oil from the producer, and how does he buy it? He buys it with money. So money is a way. It's sort of like a catalyst. It doesn't change the oil until it gets refined, and then from the refinery it goes to the I don't know, to the gas station or whatever it is, and again money changes hands. So I think money is a producer's good. Money is also a consumer's good. If you look at Scrooge McDuck, remember Scrooge? I don't know if you people your age are into Scrooge McDuck, but he's my favorite duck. And what he does is he goes into the money bin and he starts tossing it up, and so for him, money is a a consumer's good, whereas for most people, money is a producer's good. Whereas Murray says it's unique and sui generis, and I don't go along with him on that one.
All right, next question here comes from Austral Drake. And he asks, do you think that someday Austrian economics will become mainstream?
That's a good question. If truth will out, yes. But truth ain't willing out. I've been at this since, I don't know, 1965 when I first met Murray. I think it was 1965, and Austrianism didn't win out then, and now it's, I don't know what, almost 50 years later, and we're no closer to winning out, not even an inch closer. So we haven't made any progress in winning out, although maybe a little progress, because when in 1965, I don't think there were any professors. Well, Murray was a professor, and Mises was not a professor at NYU. He was sort of, I don't know what his relationship with NYU was. And Murray was at Brooklyn Polytech, I think around that time. So there were maybe two, and Hayek was at Chicago, not in the economics department. Milton Friedman and George Stigler blackballed him from the economics department, and he went into the Committee of Social Thought or something like that. So maybe there were 3 or 4 Austrian professors. Now, how many Austrian professors are there in the world? I don't know, maybe 300, 200. I'm not sure. I don't know the numbers, but a gigantic, stupendous amount. My department, all 4 of us, 4 out of 4 were Austrian economists. That must be some sort of a world record. And you have Texas Tech and George Mason and Troy, and those are places with graduate schools. And the Mises Institute, you're standing in front of their sign, now has a master's program in Austrian economics. You know, the homosexuals, the gays are always saying, we are everywhere. Well, we Austrians can't quite say that. We're not everywhere, but we're expanding. So I don't know, but if you start with 3 people and you get to 300, you've multiplied by 100. So that's pretty good. So maybe my pessimistic outlook is wrong. I still don't see us winning, but but we are improving.
Next question here comes from Audacious. And he asks, does the wealthy hoarding money make others in society worse off? Should there be greater taxes levied against the rich?
No, the very opposite. Take Scrooge McDuck, my main man, Duck. He hoards money. Well, if he unhoarded, what would happen to prices? Prices would go up because now there's more money chasing goods, right? But he doesn't dishoard, he hoards. So there's now less money in circulation because of him. So prices are lower. So he's actually helping everyone else. So if you want to help the poor, let's encourage rich people to hoard money. And then prices will be lower and real incomes of everyone else will be higher. So it's the exact opposite.
Next question here comes from Dabchick. And he asks, do you think there's scope for nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory to blow up mathematical economics from the inside out?
I'm sorry, I can't really help you out on that. I'm really, look, you know, I don't know everything. I'm ignorant. I'm doing the best with my limited brain capacity. I'm not into that stuff. So I'm sorry, I can't answer it. But hopefully there'll be 3 or 4 other people speaking after me. Repeat that question for some of the others, because I think every polite question deserves an answer. And just because I can't offer it, happily, I'm going first. So there'll be 3 or 4 other people behind me, and maybe some of them can answer that question.
Next question here comes from Slayer of Utility Functions again. And they ask, a mainstream economist would claim that they only use ordinal utility because they restrict utility functions to only monotonic transformations. Does this save the theory, or are there still issues with this formulation?
Well, I mean, I just don't see it. I don't see any room for cardinal utility because we have no units. Look, we're not against units. We believe in height. We believe in weight. We believe in speed, 20 miles an hour. We believe in temperature, 98.6. Hopefully we all have temperature or something like that. So we're not against units. And you get monotonic transformations from, I guess, Fahrenheit to centigrade or back and forth. I just don't see that helps us at all, because there are no units of happiness. Look, there are no units of beauty. There are no units of love. I don't know, there are no units of love. There are no units of hate. There are no units of happiness. It's sort of a primordial barrier to cardinal utility. And now there's this Van Neumann and Morgenstern who supposedly mathematically deduced some sort of cardinal utility. Abject nonsense. They came up with a number, but the number is not utils. What's the denomination? You always have to ask, what's the denomination? And you get a number 5. Well, what does that mean? 5 what? 5 utils? Well, there ain't no such thing as a util. So you can't have cardinal utility. Sorry, mainstreamers, you can't have it. Get used to it.
Next question actually comes from me. And I'm curious, what do you think are the best arguments you've ever heard against Austrian economics? Whether or not you believe they're correct, what do you think are just the best arguments that you've heard?
There's this guy, Sherwin Rosen, a Chicagoite, and he wrote an article saying, is there any room for cooperation between Austrians and Chicagoans? He said no. And what was his reasoning? His reasoning was that there are more Chicagoans than there are Austrians. Can you imagine that? I don't know if that's the best argument I've ever heard, but that is an argument that he took seriously, and he published it in a referee journal, that because there are more of them, they're right. Well, you know, at one time, most people believed the earth was flat. That means the earth is flat. So what me and my co-authors did is we said, look, you can't determine truth based on objective criteria, such as how many Austrian economists and how many mainstream economists there are, but let's try another one. And the other one was, he who, there are debates in the literature, Jones says something and then Smith writes a rejoinder, and then Jones says, no, Smith is wrong. And then Smith says Jones is wrong. So what we did is we traced all the arguments we could come up with. And we had the theory that he who published last was right. Now, this is equally silly because, maybe the other guy died and he was right, but he can't reply anymore, right? So what we do is we got about 150 debates between mainstream and Austrians, and we Austrians, I think, prevailed in around 90 out of 150, and they prevailed. Prevailed means they published last in about 60. So we concluded that Austrianism was right. I mean, the whole thing is silly. You can't deduce truth from who spoke last in the debate or who wrote last in the debate, but it's equally silly as Sherwin Rosen, who is a mainstream economist. You teach at the University of Chicago. That's a pretty prestigious place. So I don't know that that's the best argument against it. Another argument is that we're a cult. Why are we a cult? Because we believe in the synthetic a priori, whereas everyone knows that if you want to have science, you have to have testability. No, you don't have to have everything tested. Milton Friedman said when two Austrians disagree, they can only fight. Can you imagine Mises and Rothbard fighting each other? Whereas when two mainstream economists disagree, they can use empirical science. Well, I don't know, is that a good argument against us? The refutation of it is, we're a branch of logic. If two logicians disagree, they don't have to fight. They go over their premises. And two logicians doing symbolic logic, they have to fight? No. This is a total absurdity. I guess my answer to your question is there are no good arguments against Austrian economics.
Fair enough. One last question we'll ask you here. This is a question we asked you, Jeff Dice, so we'll ask it to you as well. Are you optimistic for the future?
Well, I sort of answered that one, are we going to take over? But now I'll answer it as a libertarian. And by the way, not all Austrians are libertarians, and certainly not all libertarians are Austrians, because in order to be an Austrian, you have to be an economist, and many libertarians are just not economists. But I'm very much of a pessimist. From libertarian point of view, because I believe in sociobiology, and I believe that we're hardwired toward explicit cooperation. If somebody in a restaurant starts choking, other people are going to grab him and do the Heimlich maneuver or call an ambulance. They're not going to just sit there. Why? Because a million years ago, when we were in the caves or the trees or wherever we were, we lived in groups of 20 or 30 or 40 people. And there was no benefit in implicit cooperation, namely markets, but there was a benefit in explicit cooperation. If you're sick this week, I help you. Next week, I'm sick, you help me. Our tribe survives. And if I don't help you this week and you don't help me next week, our tribe doesn't survive. So we are hardwired for explicit cooperation, which is towards socialism. I mean, socialism is an attempt to do explicit cooperation, but we're not hardwired for implicit cooperation through markets, because markets are 10,000 years old, whereas this other stuff goes back when we were mammals. Every semester I get freshman students and they hear price gouging and they hear profiteering. They go, oh, that's horrible. And I have to try to wean them out of that, and tell them, well, price gouging has got good market effects, yak, yak, yak. But they come into my class hardwired against that. Bernie Sanders, my old high school buddy, I was on the track team with him. He's a nice guy. He's a little stupid when it comes to economics, but he's a nice guy. He really is trying to help people. I don't believe that he is a Hitler or somebody like that. I think he's really trying to help people. But the biology is kicking in. Now, look, you and I had the same biology. It's just that some of us we're weirdos. We're mutants. We libertarians are mutants because we've overcome our biological limitations. Bernie has not. So I'm a pessimist, maybe in 100,000 years, because biology takes a long time to go. But does that mean we shouldn't try to promote liberty? No way. I mean, what's more fun than promoting liberty? Even if we're not going to win, it's sort of our moral duty to promote liberty in any case. And it's the most fun. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than promote liberty, even though I don't think we're going to win. Now, when I first met Murray, I asked him, how many libertarians were there in the world? And you know what he said? 25. 25. And he would be in a position to know because he was sort of like the spider in the libertarian web and he knew everybody. How many libertarians are there now? Maybe 25 million. Ayn Rand for my generation, Ron Paul for your generation. There might be 25 million libertarians in the whole world. So we went from 25 to 25 million. What did the rest of the world go for? Well, at that time, there were 3.5 billion people, and now there are 7 billion people. So proportionally, we did magnificently. But in terms of absolute numbers, they increased by 25, they increased by 3.5 billion people. We only increased by 25 million minus 25. So, I mean, if you look at it proportionally, we're doing very well. If you look at it in absolute numbers, we're pathetic. But we should keep trying. Everybody should promote liberty to the best of their ability.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Dr. Block, for joining us tonight. In closing, before we let you go, do you have anything you want to let people know about or any place for people to follow you at?
Well, I'm a professor at Loyola University. We're always looking for good students. And as I say, well, we only have 3 now because one of our colleagues just retired, but 3 out of 3 is still pretty good. So if you're interested in learning liberty or Austrian economics, think of Loyola University. Also, I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute, which is right behind you. And I am a lecturer there sometimes, so I certainly support that. And as for me, just Google me if you're interested in more of what I've been doing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Block, for joining us tonight. Hope you have a great rest of your evening. For everybody else, staying tuned for the conference, we're going to be moving back over to Discord here. So we'll be live with Peter Klein in just a few minutes over there. So YouTube live stream about to end, and we'll see you there. All right.